You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. We'll start our conversation with Hilliard right after this.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the show, Hilliard.
Hello, Jim.
Well, you're sitting in a province that for the first time in 25 years will have to borrow money to make its budget, and they say it's going to have a $6.1 billion deficit. That's a big red bottom line, something that you haven't seen in Alberta for a long, long time.
Well, there's been deficits, there's been deficits projected at the budget time. And then a whole pile of oil and gas revenue shows up, and it actually turns out to be a surplus. So, but the previous government that was there for 44 years would habitually underestimate the revenues, and then surprise, surprise, they'd have a surplus when it came time. But this time, I think this is actually probably going to be a deficit. It's not just an accounting gimmick. It's a real deficit because the revenues are dropping, and the increases that the government has put through, mostly on high-income people and some corporations, won't be enough to make up for the shortfall in the resource revenue.
Are people panicked about it, or do they accept it's a fact of life, that's economics?
I think people are worried that it isn't just I don't think they're worried about the deficit, $6.1 billion, that, you get used to these numbers being thrown around, and partly because of what I just said, that sometimes these big projected deficits actually turn out to be surpluses in the end. People are kind of immune to it a little bit. But the other thing that was in the budget was, I think, more worrying for some people, and that is the announcement that they're going to try and stimulate the economy, and they're going to spend money. So they're actually going to borrow money to invest money into businesses. And for instance, one example is $5,000 for a new hire if somebody hires an employee. The problem is most businesses in Alberta are laying off people. They're not hiring new people. And as somebody said, if I wanted to hire a person because I needed to, because the business is booming, I would just hire them. I wouldn't wait for the government to give me $5,000. But that one's not the most worrisome one. The biggest one I heard that surprised me was the announcement that they're going to start to actually invest in businesses. So this goes back to the 1970s, 1980s under Peter Lougheed, when he bought in airlines and he invested in a bunch of different companies. And the purpose was diversification, so to get the oil and gas, get the Alberta economy away from oil and gas. And as far as I know, there were a few successes, but there's way more failures than successes. And they're going to use AIMCO, which is the Alberta Investment Management Corp, which manages all the pensions and what's left of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, a small amount, and also the ATB Financial, which is like a bank, but it's owned by the government of Alberta, which is very odd for a free enterprise part of the world. But they're going to use those two entities. But if business people going around don't see any great opportunities for investing, why would the government be able to pick they're going to go around and try and pick winners, and it's just a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Well, the Quebec government is investing another $1 billion in Bombardier. Is that the same idea, or is Bombardier an up-and-going, successful company, so to speak, compared to what's going on in Alberta right now?
Well, Bombardier first had a long tradition of success as a privately owned company, the family, and then it went on the stock markets, and it still was very successful. And then it got into the airline business. I think they bought Learjet, and then they started doing the Canadair business jet, and then they started doing a small passenger jets to sell to the airlines. And they had some success, but then they had this really aggressive competitor in the form of Embraer from Brazil. And now Boeing is actually reaching down into Boeing is reaching down into Bombardier's segment, and Bombardier is trying to increase with the C series, they're trying to move up into the 100 to 150 passengers. And Boeing is not, and also the European one, they're not going to let Bombardier just have that. So what's happened is they spent billions and billions and billions of dollars getting this jet to go to the market. It's almost ready to be rolled out, I think. It's after many delays. But they're finding nobody wants to buy it because they're afraid, because the financials of Bombardier are so weak and shaky. They're afraid if they order that plane, there might not be a company around to service it, 5 or 10 years from now. So the government of Quebec has stepped in and said, we'll give another $1 billion. I'm sure there's been previous donations to the Bombardier project, and that'll reassure the buyers that the company's going to be around. But it doesn't seem likely that'll work. I think the stock's down to like $1 or something like that. It's a horrible story, and they have huge debts. And on top of that, the Toronto Transit Commission is suing them because another business they have is subway cars and transit cars, and they're suing them because because the cars that were delivered aren't working as they should.
Well, they just haven't delivered the cars, period. They had a deadline to deliver so many streetcars, and they haven't done it. It's a $1 billion contract.
Oh, the problem with those, I remember reading about this years ago, because they were big in Europe. There's lots of high-speed trains in Europe and all kinds of opportunity for railways in Europe. Nothing like, we have no idea in North America the volumes of people that move by train in Europe every day. And Bombardier was right in there, and but the problem is it's very low profit margins, because essentially what happens is the government's pretty much always involved in awarding the contract to Bombardier to sell the cars, and they insist that the construction of the cars and the manufacturing of the cars is done so if you sell in France or Germany or Belgium, you have to have a plant there. And of course the workers are all unionized, and you just can't make any money. You can get a contract and you can get volume, but profit. So the big profit driver was supposed to be the aerospace division, not the train division. The train division was big, but it didn't generate profits. So they've got problems all over. It sort of highlights a bit the one of the things I've been working on quite a bit lately is the Canadian market and how concentrated it's become in the last 10, 20 years. We used to have all kinds of companies like Bombardier, Nortel, and different ones, Blackberry. But now we've shrunk down to where it's basically just banks and resource companies, oil and gas and mining. And if those sectors are going to be weak for the next 12, 24, 36 months, then Canadian investors need to diversify away outside of Canada. But what is called home country bias really is strong in Canada. So Canada and Australia, the two countries with the strongest home country bias among investors. For some reason, I don't know what the reason would be.
Well, for the longest time, you weren't allowed to invest outside the country. There was a certain proportion of your portfolio that had to be Canadian.
That's right. Actually, good point. It was in 2000. I remember they they had a 20% of your RSP and therefore your pension plan as well. The maximum could be outside of Canada, and then they increased it to 30%. And then in 2000, they got rid of it altogether. So Canadians have had 15 years to diversify their portfolios outside of Canada, but for the first 8 years of those 50, from 2000 to 2008, the gains were so much better in Canada than they were in the rest of the world that nobody wanted to diversify. I was looking at the chart, and the Canadian market gained 50% over that period of time, and the U.S. and the world were actually a negative return from 2000 to 2008 because of the recession and the bursting of the dot-com bubble. So Canada was the best performing stock market in the world. So now, since 2008 to 2015, the last 7 years, Canada's been one of the worst performing stock markets in the world. But local investors in Canada have not made, some of them have obviously, but in general, on average, they haven't made the adjustment yet. The 5 top stocks in Canada by market weighting are Royal Bank of Canada, TD Banks, Bank of Nova Scotia, Suncor Energy, and Barrick Gold. And that's not very diversified. So if you're buying the Canadian index, you end up buying a huge swath of financials, banks, and there are some life insurance companies as well, and then some oil and gas stocks, and some gold stocks. So it's not by coincidence, but related. The price of oil peaked at $140 in 2008. So right around the time the price of oil peaked is when the Canadian market peaked, and it's been underperforming ever since. It's been terrible performing. The last 8 years, it's been around 2% annual gain in the Canadian market. The U.S. market's been around 9%. So we should. So then people get to this point, they say, well, is it too late to get your money out of Canada, right? What about the dollar? I don't want to transfer money at 75 cents out of Canadian dollars into U.S. dollars, I'd be paying 33% more to get my money out of Canada. So it's a tough choice for Canadians. But the concentration, the home country bias, is a major issue.
Well, I was just talking to one analyst. He said if the U.S. dollar continues to increase in strength like it has, he said a 55-cent Canadian dollar is not impossible.
I agree. I mean, it sounds crazy, doesn't it, when you say it out loud? I remember the last time, I think it was around 2002, 2003, and it got down to 62 or 63 cents, and there were a couple of senior economists with banks that put out a prediction it could go as low as 50 cents, and turned out the 62 cents was the bottom, and it started to climb after that. But we don't have the same diversification. Actually, we're more concentrated now in those sectors I mentioned than we were back in 2002. So depending on how the recovery in the world goes, obviously there's always these cycles of recessions and recoveries and booms and all that stuff goes on all over the world all the time. But the most important recovery, as far as Canadians are concerned, is the U.S. recovery. And if we no longer have it's just it's an example. But if we aren't selling the Blackberries that we used to sell in 2002, 2003, which we were selling a lot of Blackberries, even the President of the United States had a Blackberry. I heard the other day he still got his Blackberry. They can't get it away from him, but he might be the only one left in Washington that still has a Blackberry. At one point in early 2000s, everybody had a Blackberry in Washington.
Apparently, I think it's Indonesia. Blackberries are still number one.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not a business that's going to. I mean, I don't even think they're manufactured in Canada anymore. It's not. It might be one of those businesses that carries on. And I'm sure parts of Nortel, for example, Northern Telecom, parts of that company after it went right to zero and bankrupt. But pieces of the technology are probably spread all over the world, and it's probably still benefiting a lot of people. But it's not employing any people other than lawyers, maybe still in Canada. There's not. So the current idea is that as the oil and gas industry especially gets weaker and weaker, there'll be an export boom out of Ontario and Quebec and maybe BC because the dollar is down to 75 cents. But a lot of those industries that would have enjoyed that are smaller than they used to be. The auto industry is still pretty strong, but most of the new construction in the auto industry has gone to Mexico or the U.S. or elsewhere. And of course now with Volkswagen diesels, I don't know what's going to happen. I think we should start making electric cars in Canada. That would be the best thing. And make a deal with Tesla to make electric cars here.
Well, there is nothing wrong with, I know when it comes to international surveys of products, people trust Canadian-made products probably more than any other in the world.
That's a good point. And one of the products we have in Canada that could help us, and it's in a way it's an export, is education. So apparently, people coming from foreign countries to the University of British Columbia or U of A or University of Toronto or Queen's, they will pay a huge premium to get a Canadian education. And they have, I heard recently, if the tuition in medical school is $30,000 for a Canadian, it's $100,000 for somebody from Saudi Arabia or China. And so the universities are making lots of money off of that. And that's a product that people really trust coming from Canada. So maybe we could just sell the name Canadian as a stamp you put on it and get lots of money. Like Donald Trump just puts his names on it. He just puts his name on these buildings. He doesn't actually build the buildings or he doesn't own them or anything. All he's doing is just a marketing thing. So maybe we could do that. I don't know if that would work.
I know in Toronto they were making fun of the Trump Tower there because the tower on top of it was drooping. And I think there was some kind of a joke about the drooping Trump thing.
A little bit soft, eh?
Yeah.
What about the one in Vancouver? How's that? I was there a couple of months ago, and it's a spectacular construction site, I know, but it's still, I guess, got another year to go or so before it's occupied.
Right, and as you said, it's like Hyatt Hotels. They manage it, but they don't actually own it. And Trump is one of those people who will sell his name, but does he actually control it? Who knows? No,
he doesn't. So he... the way it works is he gets paid a fee up front for putting his name on it, and then he gets a commission on every condo. So if it's a condo hotel, which I think it might be, is like Shangri-La, I guess,
yep.
Then every condo that sells, he'll get a commission, $5,000 or $10,000 per unit or whatever. I don't know what the numbers are. Maybe larger numbers than that.
And does it come with the Donald Trump bed?
But the thing is, you're just like if you're. I mean, I'm sure it'll be a very nice place, and some people obviously might want to buy units there, but I wouldn't buy a unit there, but somebody probably will. But 5 or 10 years from now, it's not really going to be that there's not going to be a whole lot of benefit worth say $10 or $1,000 or more per unit to having that name on it to the person that lives there. But I learned a lot about condos in the last couple of years, and more I'm convinced that most people that buy those condos, especially the luxury ones, are really investors. They're not really going to live there, right? I don't know what the economics of it would be for them. I don't think it could be very good. But renting out those high-end condos, you couldn't possibly get your money back. But they're thinking that the value of the condo is going to rise in value, then they're going to flip it. So they'll buy it at $1.5 million, and it'll be worth $2.5 million someday, and they'll sell it for $1 million profit. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. But that's the thinking that they have.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. There's talk in Alberta of building a high-speed train line between Edmonton and Calgary. I grew up in Alberta back in the 60s and 70s. They always talked about this high-speed train. They had some, and then they disappeared. Is this thing going to be any more likely to be successful?
Well, I don't think so. I hope they don't build it. But so there's going back 50 years. It's 50 years in the 1950s or 60s that it was first proposed, and the problem is that in Alberta, well, in a general sense, people love their cars. So you get to the other end, and unlike in Europe, where you just switch from the train maybe into a subway and go to your destination, in Calgary and Edmonton, you get off the train and then there you are. And unless your appointment or where you want to go, who you're visiting, lives really close to the train station, you got a problem. You don't have a car anymore. So most people would opt to just take their car and do it that way. The other big thing about the high-speed train people don't realize is the cost of building it, because it can't run on the same train as the regular train. There is a train line between Edmonton and Calgary for freight and all that. I don't think there's any passengers right now. There's a bus which is very comfortable, sort of a high-end VIP bus that goes for, it's like $50 or $40 or something like that. It's very, very comfortable. A lot of business people use it, but it goes right to downtown, and they go in there and back in the same day. But
and they might go by your hotel to pick you up or drop you off, too.
Yeah, I don't know how. Yeah, that's right. But if you think of it, if it costs, I don't know, what's the number, $5 billion to build it or something? If it costs $5 billion and you take the cost of money at 5%, that's $250 million a year that thing has to make. Well, they said, so that's just the cost of money, right? We haven't bought any trains from Bombardier yet, or we haven't bought any fuel yet. We haven't employed any people yet. But if it costs $5 billion, that's $250 million a year just in 5% cost of money. And they said they'd have to have 10 million passengers a year, which is high for a province with only 4 or 5 million people. But anyway, let's go with that. You'd have to charge $25 per ticket just to cover the cost of the building, assuming the building was $5 billion, and I suspect that's low. I mean, that $5 billion doesn't even buy you one oil sands plant, but maybe it could be done for $5 billion. So $25 of the ticket. Well, as soon as the ticket goes up to $50 or $60, people are going to say, "Wow, I can drive my car from Edmonton to Calgary for." I was trying to work out last night after I read this and this proposal coming back. I think it's like $20 or $30 on a modern car that gets good mileage on the highway. Maybe half a tank to go from Edmonton to Calgary would be $25 or $30, maybe $40.
And that highway was designed as well to have people go from Edmonton to Calgary at 120 miles an hour, not 120 clicks, 120 miles an hour. And I think some people drive it that fast anyway.
Well, it's amazing. It would be much cheaper to just relieve some of the congestion on the highway and put an extra lane in. There's a really strange thing about the highway, and that is they actually still have some crossings that are not separated like an overpass or a cloverleaf or all that kind of stuff, so they could do that. And we were in Europe recently, and I was really impressed there. They have much higher volumes on the highways there than we have here, and all of the trucks have to stay in the right lane. They have to have 3 or 4 axles So depending on how heavy the truck is, so they don't beat up the pavement like they do here. And they can only go, 180, 80 or 90 kilometers an hour. So they're almost like a train in the right-hand lane, and they're not allowed to pull out into the left lane into the path of the cars. So they all go the same speed. They all go from one end to the other, and it's just like a little train. And with the new technology that Google and other people are working on, eventually you won't need drivers in that lane. You could just have the trucks going along, and the tractors pulling the trucks, the trailers being controlled by computer.
Well, Britain is so into the idea of either robot cars or electronic cars. They are now building lanes on their freeways that are painted green where your car will automatically recharge as you drive down that lane. You don't have to stop to recharge your electric car.
Wow, that's a good idea.
So, I mean, when they say they're going green, that is the green way to go. And I'm being told by experts, investing in fossil fuels, are you kidding? I mean, don't forget, even Canada and the U.S. pledged to phase out fossil fuels within 85 years.
You know, that's the danger for Alberta is that the borrowing money to invest in these, going back to the NDP budget and the deficit, it still is very much dependent on fossil fuels for the government's income. And so we don't have a sales tax and in Alberta. So if they don't pick the right projects to invest in, like this high-speed train might be a mistake, or I don't know what businesses they're looking at. I mean, when Lougheed did it back in the 70s, he bought an airline. So Pacific Western PWA.
Peter's World Airlines. I remember this.
That's right. You remember that?
I sure do.
And there was one, I mentioned Novotel. I think I mentioned it was a phone manufacturer. And then there was something called MagCan, which was a magnesium plant. And some of them had some sort of spin-off benefits, I think, to some degree. But there's no way that the proof, the bottom line proof at the end of 40 years is that the Heritage Savings Trust Fund only has $17 billion in it. What happened to the other $800-900 billion? It never showed up, right? So it obviously was a strategy that didn't work, and on many levels. So I was surprised to see the NDP were going to go back to that strategy. I think the diversification away from energy and fossil fuels in Alberta just hasn't happened, and it's understandable. I mean, there's so much more money in pulling oil out of the ground and selling it to the Americans that it's hard to get excited about anything else. But maybe that's changing now.
Have you done any analysis on what kind of money governments will make if they make marijuana legal?
Yeah, I don't know. It might all go up in smoke. I don't know.
Well, in BC, they say it's our biggest cash crop, unofficially worth $4 or $5 billion a year. That's a lot of money to go into government coffers.
So how does it work? Like when you're driving a car, if you like, and I was in the university in the 60s, so I definitely tried it back then, but I haven't for many years. And but I'm told by people that friends of mine, one guy I met recently for lunch, and he said the stuff they have now is like 10 times stronger than the stuff we had back in the 60s, like 10 times stronger. He said you can't move, you can't get out of your chair, you can't. So then I was thinking about that, and I was talking to somebody else, and I thought, well, how do you prove if somebody's impaired driving their car? Like, what's the test? Like alcohol, they can take a blood sample. I guess they could take a blood sample with marijuana, but that could be in the person's blood from a week ago, right? So,
well, they actually have a little breathalyzer machine now that can tell if you have smoked marijuana within the last 2 hours.
Oh, I see. So,
there is a handheld device just like the little BAT machine they have right now, but and I guess if you blew positive, they might send you down to the hospital for a blood sample to see how much was in there. So they'd have to come up with so many, milligrams of THC in your bloodstream. But
is that in the law? Like, is it illegal to be above a certain amount of THC in your bloodstream?
All they just say is if they have any drugs in you, you're busted. But
so somebody said, so it'd be cheaper. Somebody told me, they said that it'd be cheaper just to have a bag of Doritos there and hold it out to the guy, and if he grabs it, then he's busted, right?
Well, actually, the Seattle police. To remind people, it's illegal to smoke pot in public in Washington State, although it's legal. You're supposed to consume it at home. They were letting people at the Bumbershoot festival, a big music festival, they were handing out warnings about that law on nacho chips. It was printed right on the bag. So maybe there's some evidence to that. And finally, Hilliard, before we wrap up our conversation, is there any chance the next time I fly from Vancouver to my hometown of Calgary that I'll be flying into Stephen Harper International Airport?
Well, somebody said that there's a petition with 6,000 people that want to rename it Stephen Harper Airport. But there's another petition of people who say, no way, we don't want that, and there's 16,000 of those. So there's like 3 times as many against it. So what would be the name of it? If it was Stephen Harper International Terminal, that would be going to SHIT.
I like that. I think people would vote for that.
So the company that's come out on the stock market for to manufacture marijuana was called Tweed Marijuana Inc. It's renamed itself to Canopy Growth Corporation, based in Smith Falls, Ontario. And it trades on the stock market at $2.50 approximately.
Well, right now it's medical weed, but pretty easy to expand your operation if you're already approved by the government, right?
It trades on what used to be called the Vancouver Stock Exchange. So we used to have mining companies on the Vancouver Stock Exchange. Now we have marijuana companies on the Vancouver Stock Exchange.
Yeah, well,
that's a diversifying away from, like we were talking a minute ago, it's diversification away from the resource-based economy. Here we are, we're doing it. We don't even need the NDP to borrow money to invest in it. We just is doing it all by itself.
It's true. The mining business is going to pot. Hilliard, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton. He's also the author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward comments to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.